Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. My name is Annette Cycon. I am one of the founders of GPS. And so I'm pleased to be offering you this 1-hour informational webinar about how GPS is being utilized in supervision experiences, and also is for program directors at that level of use. And I want to welcome Maura McDonald-Brown. She's the Senior Trauma and Parent Trainer at Moms Do Care at the Institute for Health and Recovery in Massachusetts. And she has been using GPS and will be sharing her personal experience with us. So Maura, would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hi. It's so good to be here. I tell Annette and Liz, the other co-founder, how much I love GPS all the time. And I was just remembering that I started my first GPS training was in 2020 in March. So we were interrupted because of COVID. That's when the sort of first opened. And I was so interested in GPS and just so engaged with because it was so engaging and it was just so clear what a useful tool it was that was what I fixated on at the beginning of the pandemic, was just like, when are we gonna have the makeup sessions? When are we gonna have the makeup sessions? As though other people didn't have a lot of other things to worry about. But I finally did get those makeup sessions. I'm really happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. Yeah, you'll hear from Maura later on about the creative ways that in her role that she's used GPS. And so I'm really excited. And of course, we have our moderator, Ali Lim, and they're here to let people in. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and they will try to answer them. If you have content-related questions, of course, I won't be able to be presenting and looking at the chat and answering questions at the same time. I wish I could, but I can't. So write your questions there and we'll ask them later on. We'll address them later on if you have questions, okay? All right, so I want to begin by thanking the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, because they have been sponsoring GPS trainings for the last 5 years, since the fall of 2019. Because the people at the leadership level at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health know the GPS model very, very well, and have seen it implemented across the state, and so have really encouraged and supported staff, peer recovery specialists and providers at all levels to learn GPS. And they sponsor these trainings for those of you and your staff to be able to come to these trainings. So I want to always acknowledge and thank them. What I want you to know is that what we're going to do today is a 1-hour introductory webinar, and there are 2 big trainings coming up that you can participate in, or your staff. In May of this year and also in October of this year, we're holding our GPS facilitator training and certification. That is a 20-hour training. It is our core curriculum. And we'll be talking about that a little bit today. And also in June of this year, we are holding a GPS training for supervisors and directors. So that may be more relevant for you, although attending the facilitator training is really helpful too. And the training for supervisors will be held on 4 Thursdays in June from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And there are CEUs available for social workers for all of these trainings, for both of these trainings. And Ali will be putting the links in the chat for those trainings. If you have interest in them, you can go to those links and read about them. And if you want more information about them, you can email info@Group Peer Support. Okay. So today, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to do a brief introduction to GPS. We're going to talk about the benefit of training your staff in the GPS model to implement with your clients. And I'm going to talk about the report that we receive about the improvements in the training participants once they receive and complete the GPS training. There's some interesting outcomes that we've learned, and I think you'll be interested in hearing about. And then we'll be talking about the benefit of GPS to supervisors and directors. Maura is going to be talking about that a lot, and the implementation of GPS for provider sustainability. So that is really interesting and important for our staff right now. So I'm going to go right ahead and begin. Social support is the first line of defense in the mitigation of trauma, substance use disorders, stress, crisis, or transitions of any kind, right? What we know in our personal lives, if we just think about our own lives, that when something occurs, when we're in a crisis or some unforeseen tragedy occurs, or there's some trauma or community trauma, that we as human beings have almost a natural propensity to come together during those times of stress and trauma, because we know that being together helps us in processing and dealing with pain and challenge. What we also know is that people who isolate during times of challenge and trauma, stress, crisis, they don't do as well as those of us who know to reach out. And so that's why for, substance use disorder treatment and recovery work, groups are so important. It's the core of what you do, because what we know is that it's much harder to be in recovery and to deal with everything that comes during that time period alone. We need each other. We really need each other. And I think it's also important to say that a lot of programs sort of see group support as an add-on, like, oh, we do this, this, and this, and we have these groups. But actually, the group is the core thing. We really believe that the group experience is the core thing. And we hear this from people who've had good experiences in groups. It's that the group is the thing that sustained me. The group was my missing piece. Yes, I went to NA meetings and I went to my A meetings and I had my sponsor and I had the people in my program, but it was my group that was the missing piece for me, because it was there that I could actually show up and express my vulnerability and my fear and receive support and realize I'm not the only one. So, and at GPS, of course, we really believe that to be true, that groups are really so critical and central to what we do. These are some of our core beliefs at GPS, that we're all born whole. Look at that baby. Is he the cutest darn thing you ever saw? Like, we use this picture because I just think that baby just really exemplifies like the perfect whole human person. We're all born like that. And inevitably, being human beings, hurt happens. All kinds of hurt. It happens. It just, we cannot live pain-free in this world, in our families, in our communities. Hurt happens. And sometimes that hurt is severe. Sometimes that hurt is traumatic. Sometimes that hurt has a very deep and debilitating effect on our ability to function in the world. But what we really core believe at GPS is that healing is possible. Healing is possible for everybody. And you know this because you wouldn't be in recovery work if you didn't believe this to be true. And we've all seen the person who comes in the first time, the second time, the third time to the program, the 10th time to the program, and that it finally clicks. And so it's a core belief that I know that we all have who are in this profession. Um, and that people begin to heal the moment that they're heard. It's not typically what we say to them that is the key to their recovery. I wish it was. It's not normally the thing that I say to my own children that's going to be the key to their growth and development. It's when they feel heard. And that's what happens in groups. And GPS facilitates that. So let me tell you, what is GPS group peer support? Thomas, you asked that question like, okay, I'm here, I've never heard of this before. What are we talking about? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're talking about. So GPS is a group model. It's a trauma responsive model. It's evidence informed. We're doing research on it all the time now. And so we're going for an evidence base, but we have been doing this work for a long time, and we implement modalities that are evidence-based. And what's most important to me is that it's community-based group mental health, wellness, and recovery support. Because there are lots of people who will not avail themselves of traditional mental health care for a lot of valid reasons. One being, there's not enough mental health care in my community. Waiting lists are too long. My people don't do that. I'm not crazy. There's not a provider in my language, one who understands my culture. And, all of those reasons why people are like, no, I'm not going to go to traditional mental health care. So what GPS really is committed to is creating a community-based experience for people in the communities in which they live, led by people that reflect who they are. Because what we know is that is really the key to people achieving their goals. So it's a community-based group mental health care and wellness and recovery support. GPS is committed to promoting personal resiliency, self-efficacy, and empowerment. So self-efficacy is one of those words like, what the heck does that mean? Like, I've heard that a lot. So I always have to say what that means to me is the ability to get stuff done. Like, I have a goal and I know how to like make that goal happen. Self-efficacy is like, I am engaged in my recovery. I know how to get the things I need to get done. I know how to go get that job. I know how to support my children. And that's really critical. And I know that's a huge part of recovery work, is teaching people those kinds of skills, life skills. So at GPS, we really promote that personal strength and resiliency, as well as that ability to, accomplish our goals in our lives. GPS group peer support increases social support and diminishes isolation, because as I said before, isolation is actually one of the #1 causes of depression. And it's also one of the #1 factors in addiction experiences. And because people might not feel connected in their homes and their families and their communities, it's a coping mechanism. It's a way of handling stress. And when we are isolated, it makes everything harder to bear. So we're really committed to diminishing that isolation. It provides a structure for people to use that's easy to learn, that's trauma-informed, that's adaptable to culture, language, location, setting, population, that is anti-racist at its core, and that's inclusive of difference. And so, for instance, today in this small group, we have someone calling in from Serbia, from Bosnia Herzegovina. And And this person is running a GPS group on another continent in another language with a population that we ourselves may not be familiar with. And what we know to be true is that GPS is having an impact in that culture and in that country. We're having a training at this moment in Spanish. And what we know is that GPS is extremely effective in the Spanish language, which includes the culture and the norms and the messaging and the all of those wonderful things that make a culture vibrant are included in the GPS model and adaptable. It's very successfully implemented by the peer workforce. If that person could please mute themselves, or, yeah, thank you. I would say more than 50%, maybe 75% of the people we train at GPS are part of a peer workforce. Clinical professionals use it and say, oh my goodness, I learned this in graduate school, but I never heard it this way. I never learned it this way. Like, this makes so much sense, as well as someone who may not have any fancy letters after their names. And that's one of the things we're really, really proud of, is that we speak to that peer recovery workforce. And we implement SAMHSA guidelines for trauma-informed group care. And I always forget what SAMHSA stands for. Oh my God. Maura, can you help me here?
Substance, I think it's still abuse, but it's probably gonna be changed to addiction, mental health.
Mental, yeah,
I'll
I know.
Google it. I'll Google
Support,
it
health.
while
So
you vamp.
yeah, can you just look it up and put it in the chat? Because I'm always embarrassed that I have no recollection at all of what SAMHSA means. But it's like the overarching guidelines nationally in the United States for appropriate, the most appropriate clinical care around addiction. And they have trauma-informed guidelines, and we use those. Our core belief is that we believe in every person's ability to succeed and thrive, even though we have struggled. Everyone has a potential to be a leader, not only in their own lives, but for other people in their lives. GPS is replicable and adaptable. And so I want to share with you, if you're from Massachusetts, which I think a lot of you are, is that GPS is being used successfully in residential treatment facilities like Gandara, Grace House. I have a list: Edwina Martin House, Keenan House, Jeremiah's Inn, Hope House. All these kinds of residential treatment centers are using GPS. Also, medical and mental health centers like Mass General, Bay State, Elliott Health Center, CHD, BHN, Breen Center, ServiceNet, Lowell Community Health Center, and so forth. Peer recovery support centers, which I think, Thomas, your program is a peer recovery support center, which are all over the state: Springfield, Brockton, Cape and the Islands, Worcester, everywhere. GPS is implemented in all of them. And those are peer-led programs. And so, BSAS encourages all of those centers to use the GPS model. Community health centers, home visiting programs like First Steps Together and Moms Do Care, and so forth. And we're also adaptable to populations, as I had said. So right now, GPS is being implemented in Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, Pashto, Dari with Afghan refugees, now in Serbian, with Black, Hispanic, BIPOC, Asian, immigrant, and refugee populations, with men, women, LGBTQA+ people, youth, all parents at every stage. So pregnancy, postpartum, which is a really big part of our focus in Massachusetts, because it's such a potent time in a parent's life, and a time where we have a very large impact. And there's a great deal of concentration in Maura's program and in other programs of helping moms in particular during that postpartum period. um, and caregivers of all kinds. People who are currently or formerly unhoused or incarcerated. GPS is being used in many of the correctional facilities around Massachusetts. And for families with Child Protective Services involvement, DCF involvement. That, we know what a stress that is. And it's really, really, really helpful for families who are struggling with that system. Um, so so you can see that it's replicable in all these places. And it's not, I want you to know that it's not a cookie cutter curriculum. It's not like sober parenting or nurturing families or some of those curriculums which are about the content, right? So it's not about how do I engage with my child? How do I engage with DCF? How do I anger management? It's not about the content. GPS provides the structure of the group. We teach people how to run a group, and then they can use that structure for whatever suits their purpose, right? So when you get your driver's license, you don't get a driver's license specific to a model of a car. You get a driver's license and you can drive any car you want. It's like that, right? GPS is the driver's license. It teaches you how to run a group, and then you can use that skill wherever it is that you're focusing your attention. I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, we can clarify that a little bit more. GPS, at the core of GPS, is that we're trauma informed and responsive. And in our 20-hour training, we talk about this a lot. Like there's an entire module that's just talking about, what does trauma mean? What is trauma? What are we talking about? We're talking about individual trauma. We're talking about community trauma. We're talking about global trauma. We are all individuals in a much larger context in our world and in our communities. And all of those things impact us. And so there's not a person alive. There's not a person here in this webinar. There's not a person in any of our trainings who hasn't experienced pain and who could not benefit from being held. We've all been held during times of hardship in our lives. And what we're aware of at GPS is that every single person who walks into our group has experienced some form of challenge or hurt. And we're distinctly aware of that. And every single step, every single sequence of the GPS model, the structure that I was telling you about, is trauma informed. I created it with Liz Friedman. I'm a clinical social worker. I've been doing this work for 37 years, and group work is my favorite thing. Liz has also been involved in community healing and social justice for 30 years. So together we created this model so that we can have a place that's safe and a place that people can come and reflect on their lives and grow stronger as a result. It's at the core of what we created, and it's been successful for 20 years, and that's pretty cool. How is GPS trauma informed? It's like, well, what does that actually mean? There's a consistent, predictable structure and leadership role. Now, all these things that I'm going to tell you right now, we elaborate on in great length during the facilitator training, and we'll be talking about them more in the supervisor training in June. So I'm not going to go into them each in detail, but these are the things that make GPS trauma informed. We implement an accessible mindfulness technique for emotional regulation. It's not yoga, it's not meditation, it's not any of those weird stuff. We left those things too, but we also know that some degree of mindfulness is helpful for emotional self-regulation. So we teach about how to do that in a way that's accessible and appropriate and acceptable to your community. We have very clear group guidelines that not only help people to behave in our groups, just put it out there like that, but they also provide psychosocial education about healthy relationships and communication. That's one of the main reasons why people grow, is through the exposure to our group guidelines. It's a protected opportunity for self-reflection and sharing in an environment of non-judgment, compassion, and respect. People are heard with equal time. Our guidelines ensure that groups don't ever devolve into chaos, or one person oversharing and taking over the group. The whole model is structured so that everyone has an opportunity for self-reflection. We integrate somatic physical grounding techniques, and we're aware of polyvagal theory, which is the foundation of our emotional stimulation. And we talk about that quite a bit in our training. And we train people in the appropriate use of facilitator disclosure for the positive therapeutic effect. That's a whole thing that we talk about at length in the facilitator training, because we don't have sort of a distancing, like, I'm here, I'm the clinician, I don't talk about myself. It's really all about you with your problems. That's not the way that we lead. And so we teach people about how to do that appropriately. And once again, we follow the SAMHSA guidelines for trauma-informed group care. So I'm going to now pass over the rest of the training, or a large part of the training, to Maura, who I'm so glad that you're here, because Maura has utilized GPS. And so she's speaking about it from the place that you're standing. And I really appreciate that. So Maura, feel free to begin.
Absolutely. And welcome to the folks who joined after we got started. I'm so glad that you were able to make it. And Linda, thank you for the SAMHSA explanation. And I am going to just do a quick kind of context setting that I think will be helpful for some of the things that I'm going to share. So my program, which is Moms Who Care, uses GPS kind of in a two-tiered approach. So I am a part of the training team that supports 11 different Moms Who Care sites across the state of Massachusetts. And our Moms Who Care sites are healthcare systems that want to better support pregnant and parenting people with substance use disorder. So that is typically interdisciplinary teams of nurses, doctors, peer recovery support, behavioral health staff, et cetera. And folks within those sites are trained on GPS, and they will provide GPS group peer support to their participants, who are the pregnant and parenting people. And then my role as the trainer is to support those providers, so the staff that are implementing the Moms Who Care program. So we do that in a myriad of ways, and some of which I will be referencing shortly. But how I have been running GPS groups with my coworker, who is a peer recovery support specialist as well, or is a peer recovery support person, is in providing these GPS groups to the providers and the staff members. So we'll get into that a little bit, but I think that is important clarification for just some of the things I will share. I have my MSW. Annette and I were talking about this recently, like, how do people get trained in group work? And I have my MSW. I had a whole semester on group work, and it was all theory and no execution. I'm curious to know if folks in this room have had any training on group work, because I understood the why of a lot of group theory, and I did not understand at all how to implement it. So some of the reasons that investing in GPS is so beneficial for our staff is because it teaches folks how to run a group successfully, and with a lot of safety and containment, and it implements a consistent model across systems. So I think one of the biggest reliefs that we've heard is that program directors and supervisors know that whichever staff member is facilitating GPS group to whichever population, it's consistent. The training has been rigorous and people feel comfortable implementing this model. It will quickly integrate any new staff to the program implementation. So Annette, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but as soon as folks start the GPS training, even though it is 20 hours, as soon as you start the initial training and get a sense of what GPS is, you're actually encouraged to start running these groups so that it's a bit of an experiential process for you, that you can come back to the follow-up trainings, and the second training, the third session with questions, with your experiences, with really getting a sense of how this looks when you're implementing it. One of the things that I train a lot on, that I'm sure you all on this call have been hearing a ton about, is secondary traumatic stress. And what we know from the research of secondary traumatic stress is that in order to reduce stress and burnout, there are a couple of factors that need to be in any agency or organization. So folks need to have a sense of competence. Folks need to feel a sense of job satisfaction, which includes competence and also includes a sense of fulfillment. People need to feel supported at work, and people need to feel invested in a shared decision-making process. And so I said a whole lot of things right there that I think GPS does really well. Part of that is it reduces the stress and burnout because there is a consistent group model that people feel really competent in implementing. There's a sense of increased retention of clinicians and the peer workforce, again, because GPS does provide the sense of competence, a sense of satisfaction, and just seeing what can happen when you put peers in a room together where there's a lot of safety and a lot of containment, and just sort of the magic and the healing that can happen there. The confidence and competence is increased, and naturally, I think a lot of this sense of competence and joy and job satisfaction increases program participation, retention, and completion for participants. Again, because of what Annette just spoke to, all of the ways in which GPS is trauma-informed, there's a reduction in conflict in groups and programs, which is really critical for folks who are spending a lot of time together, sometimes living together. The model allows people to see each other and be seen in a way that lends to compassion, lends to more understanding. And then there's an improvement in one-to-one interactions, I think, across the board, not only between participants in the group, but between participants and staff who are running the group. And I think because there is this, because GPS is so intentional about making sure that all of us are seen as humans, there is an improved interaction with just staff and participants generally, and kind of coming to an understanding of our humanity. So this is Deborah Berkovitz. She is the director of First Steps Together, an amazing program. I'm sure a lot of folks here are familiar with it as well. It serves a similar population to Moms Who Care. And Deborah actually has all of her staff trained in the GPS facilitator training. It's part of their core training. So all of the folks across the sites at First Steps Together, which is similar in that it's statewide, to Moms Who Care, are trained in this. She has shared that she feels a ton of relief that there's a consistent model, like we spoke about in the previous slide, and that supervisors are also trained in it, even if they aren't the ones implementing the program, so that they are familiar and they can support their staff who are implementing it. And there's also, as we'll talk about a little later, just so much you can gain from the ethos of group peer support and the modeling of group peer support. Another major benefit that Deborah has noted is that when new staff are hired, they have people who have been doing GPS for a very long time as seasoned mentors. They can practice a lot of this. A lot of the implementation can be practiced with their new staff mates. Um, I I won't read the quote that Deborah has. I think she's speaking really clearly to the structure and adaptability of GPS, which I think are two of the pillars that I appreciate so much about the model. And now, please let me know if I left anything out.
No, thank you. That was great. I appreciate that. It was excellent. And I can't wait to hear you speak more in a few minutes about other ways to talk about GPS. So what Deborah is talking about, and what the next person I'm going to be talking about, is what she noticed when her staff got trained and how it impacted her clients and how it impacted the program. That she can add curricula and content that's appropriate for the people that we work with and still have the benefit of a consistent model that creates safety and allows the sharing to go deeper. And it also gives the group facilitators a sense of comfort because they have a structure to follow. That's huge for a program director or a supervisor to know that your staff is comfortable using a structure that's predictable and consistent. And so therefore she does use it in all her programs, like Maura just said. And this is Omar Delgado, and he's in Springfield, Massachusetts, and runs a men's residential treatment center for Gandara. And what he said when he started taking GPS, and he sent a staff member, and they started using GPS in the house, and he noticed that the whole culture of the house changed. First of all the guys wanted to come in. There were like 30 men in the room. And I'm like, how did you run a group of 30 men? I don't know. And then they were like, can we please have another one? Can we please have another one during the week? One isn't enough. We really like this thing. And this, because it's different than all the other groups that they were mandated to attend in their residential program. But what he noticed was the ripple effect. He said GPS rippled out of the group room and into the whole house. Men started listening better, respecting each other more, and they told the new guys how to behave. So more, reflected on this too. We've seen this, we've heard this from the Grace House and other residential treatment centers, is that the guidelines, the GPS model, what the people experience there ripples out not only into their treatment facility, which is awesome. Like, don't you want to have a treatment facility or a program with mutual respect and listening and a calmer environment? But also that as Maura said, the staff also experiences that. I'm going to just talk for 1 minute, 2 slides here, about some of the things we've noticed. So we do pre and post evaluations of our training participants. And I'm not going to ask you to read the numbers or even the words underneath, but I want you to notice the colors. So this is the pre, and the gold is excellent, the purple is good, the red is fair, the blue is poor, around various different skills, creating a trauma-informed environment, facilitating groups, managing group dynamics, various different skills that people came in to the training. And this is how they left the training. All I want you to notice is the difference in the colors of how much more gold and purple there is in every single category. And there's very little of the blue, which indicates poor. For every category about facilitating groups, co-facilitating, creating a trauma-informed environment, cultural understanding, every single one of these categories, once people completed the GPS training, improved dramatically, not just a little bit, but dramatically, if you look at that. Even the red is so much less, which is fair. But this is the one I want you to really pay attention to, especially if you're a program director. This category, creating a trauma-sensitive setting and using trauma-informed skills in leading groups. We asked people, how did you feel about that when you started, before you came in? So 52% reported that they felt excellent or good at creating a trauma-sensitive setting and using trauma-informed skills. That sounds pretty good, 52%. But what that means is 47% were fair or poor at doing that, which means half of your staff doesn't feel comfortable creating a trauma-sensitive setting or using trauma-informed skills in leading groups. That is appalling to me. Like, you're pretty proud of like 52% feels good about it, but I'm like, oh my God, that means half of my staff isn't. This is what happens after the GPS facilitator training, which as Maura and I both said, there's a lot of, there's a lot of teaching and learning that happens, but this is the result. 91% felt excellent or good at creating trauma-sensitive settings and using trauma-informed skills. That to me is impressive. That blew my mind when I saw that. And the fair went from 47% to 8%, and there was no poor at all. So if I were a supervisor or a program director, I'd be like, give me some of that. Because I want to know, I want to have confidence in my staff, my peer specialists who may not have had higher education. I want to have confidence that they know how to do this. So I always share this because I think this is really incredible. I'm going to pass this over to Maura. So now what we're going to be talking about is, for the next couple of slides, she's going to be finishing off by talking about how GPS impacts the supervisor or director directly themselves and how they use it for their own program, staff and providers.
Thank you so much. So I think, and I'm really appreciating that you are focusing so much on the trauma-informed aspect of it in this last slide, because I think, especially working in the substance use world, we know how strong the correlation is between traumatic experiences and substance use. And we know that a lot of us who are coming into this field have our own experiences with trauma, with substance use often. And we also know that life keeps lifing. And so while we are healing from our own trauma, while we are bearing witness to the folks who we are serving and hearing their stories of trauma and seeing, oftentimes the ways that systems fail the folks that we are serving, the world around us keeps turning. And so things are going to come up for us as we're doing this work. And so it's really critical that we are creating trauma-informed spaces for our staff, including staff meetings, including the just regular sort of everyday interactions that we have. I think that's one of the biggest personal passions of mine, is how do we create trauma-informed cultures and treat each other with the same kind of intention and respect that we do for our patients and clients. So what we've found is that some of the ways in which folks have used GPS and some of the ways in which GPS has enhanced trauma-informed meetings is it allows for the structure. So the adaptability of GPS is wonderful in that GPS trains folks on a very specific structure and gives a lot of rationale for the structure. And that structure can be used and adapted for effective staff meetings in terms of utilizing the mindfulness moment, in terms of making sure that everybody is allowed to be heard and respected, and that everybody has an opportunity to voice what is coming up for them and have their opinions be heard, not just the folks running the meeting. It allows for a calm, efficient, and respectful discussion, which includes differences of opinion. Again, I credit a lot of that to the sense of safety and comfort, to the degree that people can access that in any given moment on any given day in the workspace, that GPS fosters with its structure, with its deep respect for the humanity and the wisdom of the people in the room. I mentioned this already, it allows people to feel equally heard and respected. It really kind of diminishes some of the hierarchy that can be in the room. People know what to expect when using a structure, an adaptable structure such as GPS that creates a consistent, safe space. And what we also know is that directors and supervisors feel that their own supervisory skills and leadership skills have really been enhanced with the tools that are reiterated in GPS and the tools that are really centered in GPS, such as the use of self, that positive regard, that deep respect for the wisdom and the knowing that each person brings. And I think another thing that I've noticed is so many of us in this work, we just want to help and we just want to fix, and we're so good at it. And GPS really allows for just being with and sitting with. And I think that can really shift the culture of a workspace, even within a staff meeting, of not always going to try to fix and just sort of sitting with what is coming up for us, because we know that the work we do is really heavy at times. And we also know that the work we do can be totally transformative and fulfilling, and we don't often get the opportunity to just sit with all that it brings up for us. In terms of individual supervision, the focus that GPS does on the reflective and trauma-informed tools that are constantly practiced and reinforced, such as listening, centering on compassion, empathy, an honest use of self, and honest reflection that is affirming and strengths-based. All of these things are things that we need in order to have an effective and productive and safe individual supervision. I am trained on reflective supervision. I do trainings on reflective supervision. I love reflective supervision, and GPS. I think one of the things that GPS does that reflective supervision doesn't always do is it shows you exactly how to do these things in ways that can be transferred across kind of situations and settings. And there's a sense of a built trust and engagement in the leadership of teams, because again, there is just so much humanity shared and humanity given. And then I think the final slide
Can I
that
just
we,
step
oh,
in
of
for one
course,
second?
of
Yeah,
course.
I just want to say this is Corey O'Brien. He's the program director at Turning Point Recovery Center in Malden, Mass, I believe. And when you come to the supervisor training in June, you're going to meet him. He's going to be one of the co-presenters talking about how he uses GPS in his staff meetings and what he's noticed. We're going to have a number of different speakers coming in during that 4-session training. He's a great guy, and you'll really enjoy getting to know him.
Thank you so much, Annette. Okay, and the final thing, I know we've been talking so much, and this is my kind of, if there's anything that I personally want folks to take home. GPS offers sustainable support for staff, and that's how I personally have been using it in supporting providers and staff. And so I excuse me, sorry. So knowing that GPS is a reflective practice that helps us achieve the goal of diminishing workplace stress and working together towards a common goal as a team. The past couple years, especially, I think people have started to talk about secondary traumatic stress as an occupational hazard of the work that we do, as something that is just going to happen and we just need to accept it. And we aren't necessarily given the opportunities or the value or of what is happening for us as staff and as providers and as support people, and how it impacts us isn't taken into consideration all the time in our shift or during the 9 to 5 workday or whatever the case may be. And so we know that in a culture that values productivity, that is really focused on accomplishment, that is asking us to do a lot more with less, GPS allows us to see the humanity in each other and to build trust across systems, across disciplines. We've used this with our interdisciplinary teams and also with across the systems that we're working with. So sometimes with a DCF a DCF team or another like behavioral health team, folks have done GPS groups together. And it's a way to address this occupational hazard and the secondary traumatic stress that we're all talking about during the workday. So people will sometimes use this instead of their staff meeting, having a GPS group, especially if things are feeling particularly difficult or particularly heavy. And what I've seen personally and anecdotally is the effect on the team is really clear. We have providers saying that they don't feel isolated and alone, that they are so relieved to hear that they aren't the only people doubting themselves, feeling like they can't do this work anymore, sometimes feeling resentment towards the system or sometimes even clients. They feel more connected and more understanding and tolerant towards each other, which can sometimes be difficult in a really stressful work environment when we have to rely on each other so much. It allows for honest expressions of feeling of stress or frustration or burnout that are normal and natural for in this line of work, but we don't always get to articulate. And it creates spaces of safety to address the kind of normal relationship factors and also the power differentials respectfully. And finally, it allows us to take our work stress seriously. It really allows us to acknowledge it and to see it in ourselves and in each other. And so now we can address it. Now we can, now that it's there and it's open and we know what's happening and we can be frank and transparent about it, we can move towards doing something about it.
Thank you, Maura. This is why I've invited her to co-present this webinar, but also a large part of the supervisor training in June, because Maura has implemented GPS in teams of people that include peer specialists and nurses and doctors and clinicians all in the same room, which is not an easy thing to do. So I just really applaud her and thank her for making us better and for bringing this tool that she's using to help us create a better workplace. Because what we know in the mental health workplace and in the recovery workplace is a lot of turnover. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of stress in our clients and in our communities. There's been, opioid death and overdose death, and all of those things take an enormous toll on us personally and in our staff. And people will sometimes just simply leave. And we know this, we've seen it. We've been on the edge of that ourselves. And what she's telling us is that if you can run a GPS group for your providers where they can have a place to cry or talk about the frustration, you can't necessarily change it. You can't change the system. You can't change the tragedy. But if you can share it together, if you can have a place that you can speak about it honestly and be heard, then you can take on the next day. And that's what I'm so appreciative. And so Maura's going to be sharing a lot more about that in the June training. So I thank you very much. In closing, I just want to say that our approach to trauma-informed groups is not just conceptual. It's not just about being nice. It's not just being about kind and compassionate or well-intentioned. We're all kind and compassionate and well-intentioned. We wouldn't be in this work without that. But it's actually about skills that we train people to do, to ensure that they're being trauma-informed in their practice and implementation of the group experience, wherever that group is held. We believe that people can enhance their leadership and build stronger programs by creating opportunities for more courageous engagement for both clients and providers.